And now, ladies and gentlemen, your best man, Mr. Brian DeLeo.
I'm like Lindsay, I like public speaking, so I hope everyone's got a comfortable seat. As I was doing a little bit of research for the best man speech, I was told that the speech should last as long as it takes the groom to make love. So everyone have a good evening. I want to start off by saying, Sarah, you look gorgeous, you look beautiful, amazing. I don't have enough adjectives. And I want to thank my parents and the Ostro family for putting all this together. As I said, Sarah, you look beautiful. I think every guy in this room would agree that today is a very sad, sad day. And Dan, I think that every girl in the room would equally agree that today is a day that ends in the letter Y. So, thank you. As I was growing up, one of the things that bothered my dad the most about us when we were growing up was how competitive we were. Whether it was on the golf course or the baseball field or class, we were so competitive. So I wanted to try to set all that aside right now and say a few good things about Dan. Set all that aside. First off, Dan is great at covering up bad situations. When we were about 10 years old, Dan was about 12, we were playing baseball in our front yard with all the neighbors, and Dan came to bat against me. And obviously that's a bad situation for him. So first throw a strike, strike two, strike three, Dan strikes out. Back then, Dan didn't have a very good temper. Throws his bat, goes through our next door neighbor's window. So Dan, we're all like standing there shocked. Dan freaks out, says, if anyone asks, a squirrel jumped through the window. So we're all kind of like, okay, we're 10 years old, we're going to do what he says. Sure enough, as soon as that happens, parents start running out, my mom runs out, sees the broken window, says, what happened? Dan says, squirrel jumped through. Now that would have been a good idea, but if in fact the squirrel had jumped through, we would have had to call the Guinness Book of World Records because we found the first squirrel that was 32 inches in the shape of a Louisville Slugger. Second off, Dan is a great host. We were in high school and Dan convinced me to take my parents out of town for a week, and Dan got to stay at home by himself without a babysitter. You can imagine on that one. The parties were good, it was a week long of parties, they were good. But having the kitchen floor redone, not so good. So, unfortunately for Dan, our Nana wasn't there to be the babysitter because, as I like to refer to her, the best babysitter in the country. When Nana was there, it was a time of peace and quiet and relaxation with a loving, caring grandma. Until she went to bed around 9 o'clock at night. At which point, it turned into Woodstock. Lounge, basement, hot tub, wherever we could fit people. Nana always used to tell my parents that she and the grandkids had an understanding together. Her understanding was that she had 3 good, well-behaved, loving grandkids. Our understanding was that whenever Nana was babysitter, we'd become the most popular kids in school and keep every beer distributor in the neighborhood open and in business for a week. Lastly, I just want to say that Dan's a great brother. I'm 3 years younger than Dan, so when I went to high school, I was a freshman and Dan was a senior. Now, as part of freshman initiation, the seniors would paddle the freshmen. And this is true, it's straight out the movie Dazed and Confused, they would paddle the freshmen. So Dan was having a party, surprise, surprise, and there were 3 or 4 of my friends there and all of Dan's friends, 40 or 50 of them. And they had a few drinks and they decided, okay, it's time to paddle the freshmen. So they pull us outside, make us put our hands against the wall, and Dan's up first of his friends. They kind of like line us up and go in a row. This stuff really happens. And Dan comes up to me. He's first to go, and I'm first up. Dan comes up to me and whispers in my ear, "Act like it hurts. I'll take it easy on you." So I'm thinking, oh, this is great, you know? So Dan comes up, takes a big swing, and stops. Just hits me lightly, but nobody could tell. And so I played off. I was like, oh, you know, that really hurt. And at that point, he went on to my next friend and gave him a good smack. And he went to the next guy and gave him a good smack. So I felt like, you know, I'm king of the world. I'm the cool kid in school. But I didn't know that Dan didn't tell his friends to take it easy on me. So the next guy comes up, and I'm feeling pretty good. I'm on top of the world. My brother's a big, cool senior. I got this easy. I'm like, okay, I'll act it out again. He comes up and smacks me, and it just crushes me. I look at Dan, and I was like in pain and agony. I was like, Dan, are you kidding me? So, actually, I think, Nana, you were babysitting that time. Thanks for your help. But I want to turn and focus a little bit on Dan and Sarah's relationship. They were introduced through mutual friends, as most of you know. And Sarah told me that the first time that they met, Sarah was actually competing with another girl for Dan. And now, when Sarah told me that, I looked at her and said, Sarah, how can that be? And Sarah was so flattered because she thought that I meant, Sarah, no girl can ever compete with you. But what I really meant was there was no way two girls like Dan, especially in the same evening. In December of 2008, Katie and I planned a family trip up to New York, and most of my family came. Anna was there, and Judy and Lisa, Uncle John, and we had a big family weekend in New York. And Dan came up with the idea to propose to Sarah. So they came up, and Dan's idea was to do it at Rockefeller Center in December, ice skating, first week, big lights, big tree, just a great scene. Unfortunately, Dan had a few things working against him that night. First of all, we weren't the only people there. There were 3,000 or 4,000 people there. It was packed. So Dan, Sarah, Kate, and I are the ones who are going to ice skate. We're waiting in line, and nobody really knows the story. I'm not sure Sarah knows the story. We're waiting in line, and the other thing Dan had working against him this night was that Dan wasn't the only one who decided to propose that night. There were 4 or 5 other people who decided to propose that night. So the girls are standing in front of us while we're waiting in line. It's bitter cold out, and we're waiting in line for 35, 40 minutes. And Dan and I are standing behind the girls, and people keep proposing, and Dan and I are behind the girls looking at each other like, oh my God, I don't know if Dan was still going to go through with it, because it was losing some of its surprise element. And unfortunately, the good thing we had working for us is that Dan was proposing so early in the relationship, Sarah would never expect it. She didn't see it coming at all. But Dan had decided that he was going to propose, and he was going to do it over kind of the next year or so, and it just so happened it was the first month he decided to do it. So we're in line. We finally get to the front of the line, and it turns out to get on the ice, it's $45 a person. Now, for those of you who know Dan and how careful he is with his money, I thought we were screwed already. I thought we were heading back after waiting in line. But we made it out. We get out there, the 4 of us are skating in line, everyone's watching, and we're going around in circles. The ice isn't very big, it's no bigger than this room, and we're going around in circles, and it's, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Kate and I are skating together while they're skating together. We're kind of like, is this thing going to happen? But I knew Dan had made a decision, he was going to do it, so I was fairly confident he was going to do it. So finally, Kate and I are skating behind them, we see Dan wipe out. He takes a terrible dive, and of course the brother, I start dying laughing, like what an idiot, But Sarah, the loving girlfriend that she was, ran over to him, and says, Dan, are you okay? And the next thing you know, Dan's on one knee proposing to her. And Sarah, every emotion she had was going. She was laughing because he fell, crying because he was proposing, smiling, everything going. And this is in front of thousands of people. And Dan gets up to give her a hug because Sarah said yes. And as soon as Dan gets up, he wipes out again and takes Sarah down to the ice with him. And I think a lot of that, as I was standing behind watching with Kate, I think a lot of that moment sort of symbolized a lot of their relationship. Just young kids having fun, just they truly love each other, out to have fun. And so, if everyone would raise their glass, whatever they have in front of them, I would like to make a toast to many, many more years of tumbling down in front of thousands of people, smiling, laughing, having fun together. Here's to Dan and Sarah.